Hello, legendary listeners, and welcome to the Legendary Ladies podcast, where we have thoughtful and engaging conversations about pop culture and media. So this week, we are missing Morgan, but Kat and I are here to debate. So this week, as many of you know, Kat and I often end up on opposite ends of the spectrum with Morgan right in the middle, and it's what makes it such an engaging, interesting podcast, because when we do agree, like TV show like Legends of Tomorrow, it's so fun. So this week, we were inspired by something we recorded last week where we were talking about...
It's not aired yet, or kind of has aired yet.
And
while we record this, has not aired it. Yeah, for them it should be now. That's the fun part about podcasts.
Yeah, you don't know when we recorded this.
Only the patrons know.
Yeah, only the patrons. That's true, because if you're a patron, you could be listening live to this podcast, which we would love for you to join Patreon, patreon.com/The Legendary Ladies. You could join us live in the chat for the $10 level. It's really, really fun, and the people who have joined us really, really like it. So this
also came up with this topic.
Yes, they did. This was Pam's idea. Pam wanted to know the concept of the will they, won't they relationships in TV shows. Does that drive people to the shows? Does that drive people to want to watch the shows? Is that what brings them back? And do you as a listener like that? I love will they, won't they relationships. Slow burns in books. I know that these two characters are gonna get together by the end of the book. Is it gonna take 600 pages? Yes. Are they gonna be traveling and maybe they happen to be in an inn with only one bed? Yeah, I'm stoked. Like, I'm game for that kind of stuff. Kat, on the other hand,
is on the other side of the fence, as always. I don't hate them. It's not like fantasy for me. You know, the line is there. But no, I don't hate it. I just think I'm tired of it, and I like when I'd rather see a show where a relationship, they're already in the relationship. We don't need the fight. They're just there, and we get to enjoy the relationship. The will they, won't they, I think sometimes sucks that out of the couple, of the romance, and sometimes you don't even get to really see them in a relationship until the very, very end. You're like, oh, I want to see them together, not this kind of will they, won't they. And we'll talk about shows that do this a lot. And there's a show I'm currently watching that frustrates me how much they do it. And I guess the season finale did an okay job at Abbott Elementary, for people who are wondering. We'll talk about it. It's a show I very much enjoy, but the will they, won't they is also a big part of that show. But yeah, I think it definitely tries to sell a show, right? Because if they're in a relationship, people are like, okay, what am I striving for now? They're there. Like, why would I care? What are you trying to sell? And I think a great example is that we did our Spider-Man episode last week, and Spider-Man's a great example of that. In the comics, Peter Parker and Mary Jane, they aren't together, and I mentioned this in the episode, but the reason people think they're not together is because they don't want Peter to grow up. So if he's married, how can people relate to him? But if you also know who's reading Spider-Man comics, it's probably people older or around Peter's age who are married. So it's just like, okay, like and looking for those type of stories. I don't think that's it. And then, you know, my theory is mostly that Marvel can't sell the will they, won't they anymore. It's like, if they're together, you can't say, well, are they going to get back together? Because you can't use that trick again. They're already together. How can you get the height of that again, where sales do spike up when you try to sell that to them? So I get it, but sometimes I think it's just a selling tool more than a good story device.
You know, what's interesting is that we were going to bring up the concept of how, like, procedural TV shows like Castle, Law and Order, Chicago PD, Chicago Fire, all those kind of shows, like Grey's Anatomy, they do the Chicago shows. They do this will they, won't they concept. And it's interesting because that strikes me as a very similar sort of a story format to your comic book format that you're talking about. These long runs, like Law and Order is what? Law & Order SVU has 24 seasons now.
Same cast too, right? Like for the same main characters.
Yeah. This is where it gets interesting. The two main characters, Olivia Benson and Elliot Stabler, were in through season 12. And then Christopher Maloney, who played Elliot Stabler, backed out like cold turkey. There was no resolution between the characters. They gave the finale episode was a good character motivation for his character leaving. But the first episode of the next season, of season 13, he's not there. There's no resolution. Olivia just learns he's gone. And it's like that for almost 10 seasons. And then they start up Law and Order Organized Crime. And Elliot Stabler shows back up. And Organized Crime became his show. Law and Order SVU became Olivia's shows. But they do frequent crossovers, especially in the first few episodes of Organized Crime, because it's around Elliot's family. And I have to tell you, I 100% turned on Organized Crime just to see the resolution between these two characters who've not talked to each other for years, but who were clearly attracted to each other. Like the Olivia Benson, Elliot Stabler, will they, won't they, for 12 seasons of Law & Order SVU, knowing that Elliot is in a relationship, like he's married, but it's a turbulent relationship. Are they going to get together? They're partners. Like this whole idea between those two, and then they disappear, and it breaks her heart because she lost her partner and one of her best friends, and then he shows up again 10 years later, and they start a new TV show. I totally watch every episode of Organized Crime hoping Olivia Benson shows up and that they have some sort of steamy chemistry. And literally the day after we decided to do this episode, there was a crossover with Organized Crime and SVU. And there were some very well written scenes because these characters have been together forever, and both the actors are executive producers. So they are stringing this out. Did I totally watch it the night it came out? Absolutely, I did. I was like,
and I'm sure a lot of people did, because people love Law and Order everything.
It's so good. Like, it drove me to want to watch the episode. I was like, I'm gonna watch this because I want to know. And like next week episode, the Brazil trailer, which always has the best scoops, by the way, always spoilers in the Brazil trailer.
They know what they're doing.
Has this moment where it's like, oh no, one of them gets shot. And I'm like, I'm totally going to be watching this the moment that it airs. 100%. I'm going to be there. Like that will.
Is it getting to the finale though? Because it's May.
We're almost there. We're episode 21. Next week will be 22. So I think we're getting 22, 23, 24, depending on how many. By the way, those of you who are watching on my screen, if you see smoke drifting across, that's incense. My house is not on fire. It just drifted across the screen. But like this idea of the will they, won't they. Like, I keep coming back to Law & Order SVU, even though it's 24 seasons in.
And that's 24 years.
24 years, and I am coming back for this. So it's interesting, like, Spider-Man, I think what's different is Spider-Man aging?
Not really.
That's the difference. These characters are clearly aging. You're watching them get children. You're watching them grow up. The kids are growing up. Like, these characters are aging. They're actually going through real life.
I mean, 24 years.
Stagnated? Like, that's very interesting to me. That like, is that almost a curse? Like, the fact that the comic book characters don't age, can't age, and that makes it impossible for them to make a will they, won't they relationship work because there's never any payoff?
Yes and no. I think what's great about comics is that you're allowed to do Elseworld stories. So, you know, the current version of Spider-Man can't age, but that doesn't mean you don't get Old Man Logan. You don't get versions of them where they do age, and you do get to see them at different times. But yeah, when it comes from your point of view, the will they, won't they? I don't know, because in the other characters, it works, right? Lois and Clark, I know they were like not together for a little while, but for the most part, they're together and they make it work. And he's been around longer than Spider-Man, and they're still together.
Well, that's an interesting concept too, is the idea of like, what about characters in a TV show or in a book where you know they're eventually supposed to get together, like these fated characters, right? Like, you know, Clark and Lois are going to get together. You know, Barry and
look at Arrow. You thought
exactly
Laurel was going to get together with Oliver, but because of the on-screen chemistry of Felicity and Oliver, they changed that.
Well, that was the opposite then. So that was like against a fated character.
Exactly.
That's an interesting thought. Like, did that will they, won't they of Oliver and Felicity drive more interest than the will they, won't they of Oliver and Laurel? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, and I think it was, I don't want to say easier, but because Laurel didn't have didn't start out as Black Canary or didn't even have the name Dinah, I think it was a little bit easier to do. And obviously, I know, I'm not I'm not on either side. I'm not a Felicity Oliver shipper. I'm not a Laurel or Oliver shipper. I'm just speaking on the terms of like maybe why they could have done it a little easier than Clark Kent and Lois Lane. It's just like, okay, well, she didn't. It might not be that version of the character. I do believe it is. I'm just saying that's probably what they did. So I think that's interesting. But then when it came to the Iris and Barry thing, I think the only thing that came close was the character from like season 1. What was her name? She actually was in the comics too. Patty. She was in the comics, so they were in a relationship at that time. She's like, oh, maybe that could happen. But you knew, like, for the most part, they didn't even bring many characters into Barry's life that was not Iris. So it's just like, all right, yeah, I think he's gonna get with Iris at some point.
So like from a writing perspective, it's kind of like will they, won't they? But there's the they will, but when concept.
Yeah, but isn't that every will they, won't they though? Because I think for the most part, these will they, won't they's happen. Law and Order didn't, but when you look, I don't watch The Office, but when exactly, maybe it will in the next 10 years. But I didn't watch The Office, but I know people knew like that couple was going to happen. Yep, I think and then Abbott Elementary, I think they're going to get together. It's not a question, will they? It's like, yeah, but when are they going to get together? And I think that's the frustrating part for me. It's like, all right, I know it's going to happen. Like, why do I have to wait 10 years for it?
So if we know it's going to happen, like you're like, let's take Castle, for example. We know that Castle and Beckett are going to get together. Like, there's no world in which the writers don't make that happen.
Right.
When does a show frustrate you when it takes too long? Because I have very distinctive reasons. I'm like, I don't like that as a stalling tactic.
Yeah, yeah.
I really, really dislike memory tropes. I forgot you told me you loved me because I was in a car accident. Like that or fake memory tropes that happened in Castle. She's like, oh no, I was shot. And spoiler alert, Castle told me that he loved me, but I forgot because I was shot. Like, and then she doesn't actually forget and she keeps it from him for a year. So I don't like stalling tactics that are stalled because of, I guess, secrets. And I get frustrated with the we're not going to get together because I'm with another person instead trope. Like, I don't mind if they take a really long time to discover they have feelings or if there's other shit going on, but I don't like we're single for 2 seasons, but in season 3, one of us finds someone else to be with. And then by season 4 or 5, we get together because that seems very disingenuous. Like, it seems very, I guess maybe it's real. I don't know. It just seems weird to me. Like, what frustrates you when it comes to stalling?
I liked the memory tactic. I agree. The memory thing is interesting that I don't really like. But what you brought up of like when they end up with somebody else, I think it's frustrating, but also I feel like feels a little bit more real, like that happens more in real life. It's like, okay, you lost your chance. Like, gotta move on. So I think I don't love seeing it on television, but I could kind of understand that route. The stuff I don't like, honestly, just doing the will they, won't they without, honestly, just in general, because I feel like it's a stalling tactic in general is the will they, won't they? Because what's progressing? What are they doing as characters? They're just like fawning over each other, but not doing anything about it. It's just like every episode's the same thing over and over again. They do that little glance. You're like, okay, cool. And what else is going on with their story?
But is it because there's something else going on? Like, you look at Legends of Tomorrow, and Ava Lance I think she was introduced in season 2, but really season 3. She came in season regular, season 3, and it took them 2 seasons. But they were busy as fuck. Like, it's not like they weren't just doing it. Like, they're literally trying to fix the world and the planet and, like, time travel stuff. Like, so they were busy.
They were growing as characters. I feel like when it comes to, let's say, a Law and Order, where it's like 10 seasons, these characters. They don't need to grow anymore.
That's good.
It's like, just let them be together. I think with Legends, it's like they still need to grow as people. They need to grow as characters to be with each other. I think that's when I don't hate it. And I think Abbott actually did this, and spoiler alert for this season, but the end of the season, we're only on season 2, and I was getting frustrated with the will they won't they, because they're not the most interesting part of that show, and I don't think they have wonderful chemistry, but they're like, let's put these two together. It's the main character and another teacher. But I actually like the finale, because the finale says that they actually confess their feelings for each other, and they decide, you know what, I don't think we're ready for this. Like, I don't want to lose my friendship with you, so I don't think we should go through with it. And they kind of have to deal with those feelings. And you're like, oh, cool. The reason they're doing this and stalling and doing the will they won't they is actually like to let them both grow separately. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting take, because if they're growing as characters to be better for when they're together, I'm cool with it. But when it's just like, all right, you're the same character when you get together, why do I care?
Okay, I absolutely love that. Like, nail on the head. That is totally, that's when you get the best will they won't they relationships. Is when the characters grow into the relationship instead of the relationship jumping on just the initial chemistry and not letting the characters grow. Like, I'm trying to think, besides Abbott Elementary, can you think, and Legends, can you think of any other shows that maybe strike you? That, like, where the characters are growing in addition to the will they won't they. Like, for instance, Bones is one of the world's most famous will they won't they's. I don't necessarily think I saw enough character growth between those individual characters to justify 6 seasons.
Maybe The Flash. I think The Flash, I don't remember when they got together, and I know it was kind of early on, but they definitely grew as characters before they officially got together.
I'll give you that, especially because Barry was going through a lot. Like, he discovered powers. Yeah. Like, he was going through some shit.
And Iris was trying to be a journalist. She was trying to figure out her career. So I'll give The Flash.
Chicago PD did it well with 2 characters later in the series, who, unfortunately, they then botched it when one of the actors left the show. And they kind of cut the relationship cold turkey, but didn't. It was a long story. But that was with Jay and Haley, because she was new to the team and she was growing into the team and she was growing as a detective and he was getting over trauma. And so they became partners and they actually became really good friends for a very long time before they decided to make the romantic step. But when they actually decided to make the romantic step, it was literally like, I'm in love with you. Kiss, we're together. And I was like, oh, okay, we're there. I'm trying to think of any other shows that I'm currently watching or did watch.
I'm looking up a list now, and I saw Will They, Won't They that dragged. I see Clark and Lana.
Yes.
Ross and Rachel, and then Alex and Piper from Orange is the New Black. All of them. Yeah, no, I agree. I actually... Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Which is a whole nother story with How I Met Your Mother. But... yeah, I'm actually not a huge Friends fan, and which is so weird because I've seen every episode. You've never seen Friends, right? Have seen Friends?
I've never seen all of Friends. Okay. I've seen clips, but I've never seen all of it.
I've seen all of Friends, but I remember as a kid I liked it a lot more than I do as an adult, and obviously I'm not like raining on anyone's parade. If you like Friends, I'm glad you like Friends. But the Ross and Rachel one obviously went on for a long time, but it made that show famous. Like, if they didn't have Ross and Rachel, Friends would not be Friends without the Will They, Won't They. Like, they kind of started the Will They, Won't They for sitcoms, because most sitcoms up to that point were family sitcoms. They're shows with people together already. There's, there were a couple. Frasier had Niles and Daphne. That was a big Will They, Won't They for like 6 But did that come after or before Friends?
Let me Google that. I'm actually really curious.
Frasier came out...
You look up when did Friends air?
Friends, I think it was 1990. Let's see. Well, Frasier, you look at Frasier 93. And then Friends was 1990. Oh no, 1994. So it came a year after.
That was happening concurrently then. You know what though? Like, the first episode, the first season, there's like definitely like a wow, she's attractive, and then I wonder if they were like, oh, it's working for Friends, let's do the Will They, Won't They.
I wouldn't be surprised, and again, because that Will They, Won't They, literally like the commercials, it sold the show to become water cooler television. Obviously this is before streaming, so everyone was watching the same shows, and it's like everyone's talking about Friends. So I think that's interesting. But then you look at a show that was also around the time, and a show I really like, Seinfeld, which obviously has no will they won't they, which I find so interesting. It's the anti will they won't they, because you have Jerry and Elaine, and they were a couple. That's how they started the show, was that they were ex-girlfriend and boyfriend. You never wanted them to be together, and they never gave a hint of it. They're just like, yeah, they somehow are really good friends, even though they broke up. They just figured they were better as friends, and they never tried putting them together.
So here's the question then. Like, I was trying to think, because in that time, that's when Star Trek, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager were all starting. And those were big, 7-year-long shows, weekly shows. That was like the Star Trek version of their procedurals at the time. And there were definitely a couple relationships on their shows, but not that much. And in one of them, in Star Trek, 2 characters who eventually end up together and spend 4 seasons together, the 3rd episode of the 3rd season, they're like, hi, we love each other. And it kind of comes out of nowhere, where you're almost like the writers were just like, let's make it work. And then it works fine. The relationship has its ups and downs, and they get married and they have kids on the show, and it's like great.
Forced relationships you're talking about.
Yeah. So do you prefer, because there's something to be said about just diving into a relationship, about just being like, hey, you know what? We went on the proverbial Star Trek date, and we had like 2 dates, and we're like, hey, you know what? This is working great. Let's be in a relationship. Like, that's also real life. Like, let's just give it a shot. Do you prefer that, or do you prefer the will they, won't they? Or does it all come down to the characters? Because I think it comes down to the characters. Yeah, the middle.
Yeah, I think it comes to the characters. I think it depends on how you do it. Because I agree. Like, I like the idea of like, all right, you went on 2 dates. Let's see how this goes, because that's more real life. But I like where you get to see that. It's hard because when you have something like that, they're usually a new character to a show, right? Like, you're in season 2 or 3, and they have to be new to the cast. So you have to like warm up to them. So it's like, oh, do I want to like meet this new character? Don't I just want to like stick around with my old crew? So there's a balancing act. I kind of like the idea of having a show where there's characters within the cast already that just so happen to end up being a relationship. Like it organically happens where you're writing them, and like the characters kind of speak on their own. Like, it was never originally planned. There was never that seed, and I think that's when it works well. I'm trying to think of an example of that where it's just like, oh man, the romance just kind of happened.
Oliver and Felicity.
Yeah, Oliver and Felicity is a great example of that,
one where they were just like, oh, this chemistry is working really well. There's a book that I read that I've told you and Morgan about, called A Court of Thorns and Roses, and what's really interesting is it literally halfway, like the first book, she has 2 characters get together, but then by the second book, she completely switches who the main character is with. And you can actually feel the moment in the first book where it's like she was writing and goes, oh, I don't like this anymore. I actually want her with that one instead. But I don't want to go rewrite the first part of the book. And so it's almost like she recast. It felt very like, I recast this book in the middle of it just to make things work. But then you look at something like a TV show like 12 Monkeys, for instance. I have always told people, if you're going to watch the first episode of 12 Monkeys, give it 3 episodes. If by the end of 3 episodes, you do not buy into the relationship between Cassie and Cole, the 2 main characters, if you don't buy into this clear connection that they have each other, whether it's relationship or not, but they have a very clear connection. If you don't buy into it, you won't enjoy the rest of the series, because the whole series hinges on their relationship. Or Fringe, the whole series hinges on Olivia and Peter's relationship. Like, their will they, won't they's run the series, but not necessarily because it took long. Both of those shows, the characters are with each other by season 3, sort of.
Not bad either.
In Fringe, he's actually with the doppelganger, and he doesn't realize it's the doppelganger, so it's
you could still say they're together.
Yeah, point, right? they would like to be together.
And Fringe lasted a long time too. So season 3 is pretty early.
Yeah, Fringe got 5 seasons.
5 seasons.
12 Monkeys got 4.
Well, 4. But, yeah, that's maybe a little bit more of like, oh, you wish you saw them a little bit longer.
Yeah,
together.
I think my sweet spot is between seasons 2 and 3. I think if you're starting to drag to season 4 and 5, especially in today's day and age, there is a will they, won't they by the time we get canceled. Like, there's a little bit of a fear of that. Like, are we going to get canceled? So can we think of like some good relationships where like the characters, kind of like the Oliver Felicity thing, where the characters drove the like the things that you like, the will they, won't they's that you did like Are there any?
Will they, won't they's that I did like. I mean, I really liked. I watched Roswell back in the day, and I liked Liz and whatever the main character's name is, forget his name. But they did a kind of interesting will they won't they, but they were more of like they were will they for the beginning, and then in the middle they like break up for a little while, and then in the end they're like, oh, let's get back together. I think I rather those, I guess. We were talking about, I haven't seen the show, maybe we probably will at some point in the podcast, but we were talking about something like Superman and Lois. That's kind of what I like more. I do like when they just kind of start in the relationship and you get to see them grow as characters. It's interesting. I was, again, looking at the list, but then also I was going to talk about just like writing a romance has been fun. Like
I was going to say, because you're writing a will they, won't they? Right
yeah.
Now, Kat.
Yeah. I know, right? Kind of. But yeah, when we started that comic, so for the audience, I write a webtoon called Slice of Life. It's a romance. It's queer. And we have like, how many chapters? We have like 4 issues available of the comic. So it's like hundreds of pages of it. And they are just now getting together pretty much. And there's still hurdles that they have to have. And it's so funny because when I started
That's cool.
writing
it's only 100 couple pages, Kat.
Right? I know.
Will they, won't they? She says, writing a 400-page will they, won't they?
I know, and that's what's so weird, because when we started this, I remember saying my goal for this comic is I don't want to be like other romances. I don't want to be like other queer romances where it takes them so long to get together. And then as we were writing it more to develop the series more, we're like, oh man, like we kind of have to prolong this a little bit because you want to live with these characters longer. And I think that's why I gave the example of, I want characters to grow and be with each other when they're ready. And I think that's what we've been doing with Slice of Life. But it's been interesting because I never thought that's the route we would have went. We would have done this a lot quicker. But then every single time we're like, no, we need this. Like we didn't create obstacles to create obstacles. We created obstacles because the character said so. And I think that's been fun to write. And another thing I was seeing, it's kind of turning the subject a little bit, but I was looking at this will they, won't they's that lasted too long. And one was Damon and Elena from the Vampire Diaries. Ugh. And I think that's interesting because that was a love triangle. Will they, won't they? We were like, damn, they also have a choice of another person altogether. Like
triangles.
I know. I'm not a huge fan either, but it's interesting that they did that.
I think that maybe that's the will they, won't they's. That's not a will they, won't they though. That is a who will they choose. That's different. Like a love triangle is not a will they, won't they. A love triangle, like a will they, won't they only happens on a seesaw. Like all of my favorite will they, won't they's are 2 characters, partners or character. There's not fighting over each other. It's fighting over their feelings.
It's a different type of thing.
We also triangles. Hate them.
You also don't like when they get another person involved to break up the couple. So that makes sense that you feel that way.
Exactly. Like, and it is interesting because that to an extent is okay, but it's not. My dog just stole the chocolate covered espresso beans. Hold on.
Yeah, no, that's something you gotta. Yeah, that's something you gotta handle. As Amy does deal with the chocolate-covered espresso beans, Pam does say Lost Girl had a good will they, won't they triangle with who Bo would end up with. And then she also says some shows run with the perpetual hook and wait until sweeps. So they're like, oh, we do it that way, we get renewed.
Well, yeah, it works. It's worked for Law and Order. I gotta tell you, it's done the trick. So yeah, I think that's my biggest pet peeve is when it's not characters who prevent the two, it's not characteristics, it's not character growth that prevent the 2 characters from getting together. It's a third party preventing the 2 characters from getting together. That frustrates me because then it's like, oh, you don't actually get a chance to see them grow.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to just say one thing that reminds me of the sweeps aspect is that we were talking about earlier before we recorded how streaming really changed this a lot. And maybe that's why we don't see will they, won't they's as much, because for streaming, they don't have to do it. They just like kind of do whatever they want because there's no sweeps. But with network, you have, around your mid-season where they're like, oh, are we going to get renewed? Are our ratings good enough? So it's really interesting to me. That's why storytelling has changed too, because they kind of cancel television shows for different reasons.
But I gotta tell you, Bridgerton runs entirely on will they, won't they. oh my gosh, you want the definition of a will they, won't they? Season 2 of Bridgerton is the world's most epic slow burn Regency. Slow burn, will they, won't they? Like, both seasons are a will they, won't they. Like, Bridgerton relies on it. It's based off a romance novel, though. So, I think streaming does enough will they, won't they. Certainly we know, even though we haven't
Why
seen
do you
it,
think they do it then?
None. Say again?
Why do you think they do it then if it's not for sweeps?
I think, well, I wonder if we could look at the success of will they, won't they's on Netflix shows and streaming shows and ask ourselves whether those relationships are better for it. Better for the idea that we don't have to drag it out. Like season 1 of Bridgerton, Daphne and Simon, will they get together? By the end of season 1, they have. By the end of season 2, the two main characters have. Like, so
it doesn't take as long.
It doesn't take as long because it's written out ahead of time. They have it like the whole thing. It's just the difference in the writing style. It's the difference in the creative style. Like I don't know if I could say definitively that all streaming shows have better relationships, but I think there is something to be said for the fact that there definitely isn't a will they, won't they moment in the next week's commercial. Like that is what they bank on. Every next week commercial that you see on a procedural show is two main characters in Grey's Anatomy find themselves in a closet, and it's just, and then they have like flash of them getting close to kiss and cut to black next week on Grey's Anatomy. Like it very clearly builds on that. Whereas Netflix, no, you just watch it grow. Like I would argue that those relationships on Netflix shows or Prime shows or short season shows even, where most of the season is written before it starts filming, like I would argue that stuff has more organic chemistry and growth.
But do more people talk about them? Because I mean, when you especially talk about the binge aspect, you watch it so quickly, you're just like, all right, well, it's done. Or when it's really short seasons, like, all right, I live with them for 10 weeks. But when you're watching Law and Order for almost your whole year, you're talking about them more. They're kind of living with you more.
You know what's interesting is I think that Instagram and TikTok and Reels and Shorts specifically have changed what my answer would have been 3 years ago. I think 3 years ago, the answer is we wouldn't be talking about it as much. But my Instagram algorithm knows I love this shit. It knows I love will they, won't they, slow burn relationships, the like longing gazes across a ballroom, will they dance together? And, oh no, they touched hands. Knows I love that shit. So my Instagram search thing is people who have posted clips, and I see that all over the place. Even though I'm like, oh, I haven't seen the Queen Charlotte thing. I've seen enough clips that I now want to watch it. Like,
and you like that you saw enough clips and that they
I do. It inspired me. The book series that I've absolutely fallen in love with, I only read because I kept seeing it on Instagram and people kept talking about it, and I kept seeing quotes. And that's not something like in the book world that you would ever see 20 years ago. Like, I'm literally just scrolling on my Instagram and someone has posted a reel with a really snazzy song, some cool graphics, and 2 lines from the show. And I was like, or the book. And I'm like, yep, I'm gonna have to read that book because I want to know what characters are saying that and how did they get there. Like, I think that Instagram Reels and TikTok Reels and Shorts and conversations like this drive people, like little snippets, just little suggestions. Like that's the Netflix version of the next week on Grey's Anatomy. Is, do you want to, did you find that interesting? You should probably watch the show because you'll probably love it. I have absolutely started TV shows because of clips I've seen on Instagram.
Do you think Netflix in their house, let's say their production houses, create this, or do you think fans create this? Like, do you think it's part of their marketing ploy, or do you think it's like fans just have run wild with it?
Both. Fans initially, but the networks are catching on. The NBC Chicago shows are very good at it. Their social media is excellent. They do really good about pulling the clips that were really intriguing and posting it on, and it just gets shared like wildfire. Yeah, I would say like authors now, especially like on Bookstagram, authors use it aggressively. It's really cool to see indie authors and first-time writers posting quotes from their own books, or posting, like, they'll have someone, read out loud just a paragraph. And I got it, like, they're like, did you like this quote? You're going to like my book. Check it out. Coming out in November. Like,
I love that. Yeah.
Really effective marketing for smaller groups. So I don't necessarily think that Netflix planned it, but I think the fans took it that way. And I, if TikTok Reels had been a thing during Castle, I thought Twitter was crazy enough during Castle, but, like, TikTok would have been a completely different story. I mean, GIFs started it. Think about it. Back, 5-6 years ago on Twitter, GIFs were the big thing. You would see a GIF of Castle and Beckett just kind of doing, like, something silly together, or they touched hands, or when he would hand her coffee. And those moments would just get shared and shared and shared and shared. And now you've got these small little 10 to 15 second reels, which are basically extended GIFs. And it gets shared and shared and shared and shared. And people go, even though the fact that whole series is online, that is driving people to watch it. And so I definitely think that they're having those, they are making those moments in those shows where they're sitting there going, this is such a gifable moment, or this is totally unreal. I think that
that's so interesting.
And I'm in a show right now where we have two characters, and I'm Lady Macbeth and we're with Macbeth, and we were blocking a scene the other day, and we changed something because we decided to do a blocking moment. We had a moment where we're holding our hands together, and Tanner, who's my Macbeth, he's like, this is going to make a really cool stage photo. Like, this is going to look really cool if someone takes the picture from marketing material. So we kept that blocking moment in almost exclusively because we know how cool it's going to look on stage when someone takes a photo of it and shares it.
I love that we're talking, because, the beginning of this podcast, we were talking about the actual will they, won't they, and we kind of forgot the word sell. And I think this is really interesting where, how do you sell something? And now you're like, well, we're selling this through Instagram. We're selling this before through Twitter. And I think now we're actually seeing a lot of movies about selling stuff like this. I watched Air, which was the Ben Affleck movie. He directed it, and it came out this year, and I loved it. It's my favorite movie of the year thus far. And it's about Nike selling the Jordan shoe, and they talk about, like, how that happened. And it's like this idea that, how were we sold that Michael Jordan was the best basketball player ever? Sold us the idea, like, he's just a person. But how did Nike become the best shoe ever? Like, how did being this underdog, like, how did that happen? And then I was watching, I've watched this like weeks ago, that movie, but I was watching the Michael Jordan Last Dance documentary, because a lot of people liked it, and I like documentaries a lot, so I wanted to watch it. And this has nothing to do with the documentary, but I was looking at the Gatorade drink. And I was like, oh yeah, Gatorade's always around, like, with games. I wonder, like, how that happened, and, like, now how we visually think about when you play sports, or when you're a kid, you drink Gatorade, and you're like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, how did Gatorade create that that marketing scheme for us? Connection.
It's a straight up behavioral learned Pavlov response. How come when you drink Gatorade, you think of a sports game?
Mm-hmm. And I feel like, there's this funny idea of, like, oh, there's no superpowers in the world. You can't fly. You can't do this. But is marketing kind of a superpower of mind control? Because, like, we are being, and not to be like whatever, but yeah, we're being controlled by media. We're controlled by commercials and all the things we do.
Inspired.
Influence maybe, but honestly, okay, think about it again. Sports, that kind of, no, but not in a bad way. I'm trying to say, like, Gatorade, you're thinking about sports.
It's no,
automatically
response.
You're always, exactly. Would you say you're being controlled to think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, Gatorade makes you think about that. Are we, when we see there you go. So that's an interesting question. Whenever I open up a book and I've met the female main character and I've met the male main character, I am conditioned that the kind of books I like, those two characters are gonna get together. Like,
because you were sold on that idea back in the day. You were sold on it. And that's what I'm saying when the word control is strong. But that's what I mean by like saying like, okay, your mind was influenced by something, was
Yeah.
influenced by all these
Castle.
patterns. Sure, exactly. Castle. And I think that's interesting. And media knows this, TV knows this, where it's like Netflix. I was saying like, oh, did Netflix make those Instagram reels? Because they want you to watch their show. I mean, even from like an indie perspective, like when I want to sell my comic, we think about like, okay, if you have an ad, any ad, why do we have ads, right? Like it doesn't, most ads, if you're walking in Times Square and you see an ad for PlayStation, you're walking, you're like, all right, cool, PlayStation's there. I don't play video games. I don't care about PlayStation. So you're not going into that Best Buy that's next door being like, I should go get this PlayStation. But you're thinking about PlayStation later when someone's saying, well, what's the best video game console? What's everyone talking about? And they're like, oh, well, everyone's talking about PlayStation. No one's talking about PlayStation, but that was sold to you because you saw it in the Times Square. And I make this joke, but like when I'm doing like business with a business partner, Phil, like I call it the Coca-Cola effect, where you're walking Times Square and you're like, I see this Coca-Cola. You might not like Coca-Cola, you might not like soda, but Coca-Cola is the best soda you've ever had because it's everywhere. It's sold to you everywhere. So if you showcase your product enough and you're on Twitter enough, you're on Facebook enough, you're showing your thing enough, people are gonna be like, yeah, Kat has the best comics. It's like, oh, why? What has she proven to say that? It's like, well, I see it a lot. Like I see her comics a lot, so she must be great at it.
I mean, if you started a new TV show right now, it's a police procedural or a lawyer procedural, and the two lawyers that run the company, one is a single man, one is a single woman. You know what? I'm going to assume that those two characters are going to have some good chemistry and get together. Like, right. I am preconditioned to now think that that is what's going to happen.
And do you like that? Are you sold to the idea that, because yeah, you of course you're saying that, well, but did the previous show sell you to like those things, right? Like what you're saying, oh, I know that's going to happen. Does that actually sell you on the TV show? It does, which is interesting.
It does. I watch certain shows for the chemistry only. You know what takes a show and makes it better, and when I sit there I go, oh, I actually think that this succeeded more than they planned, is when the show actually outweighs that will they won't they moment. And I literally right now I'm thinking, just because it's fresh in my brain and it's honest, Law and Order Organized Crime is infinitely better than Law and Order SVU. Like the first season was a little rocky, but seasons 2 and 3 have actually been really spectacular television, in my opinion. The cases are interesting. The characters are interesting. The will they, won't they, the crossovers only have happened like 3 or 4 times the whole season. Now, do those moments make me keep watching every week to wait for that to happen? Absolutely. But I am enjoying that show more than almost any other show I'm watching right now because it's so good. And like, I think that that's when you get an absolutely superb show. When the will they, won't they comes in conjunction with character growth and accentuates an otherwise well-written show.
Yeah, and a good TV show. New Rachel does ask, do you think sometimes GIFs or GIFs can be deceptive? I think it's more on your side. Absolutely. And why do you think that?
Like, could GIFs be deceptive? Can character quotes from movies or from books be deceptive? Absolutely. And it's funny because I would say that the most of the time that the GIFs are deceptive, those are the ones from the networks. Those are the ones that, like, I'm thinking the Chicago shows. When they have a GIF that is 2.5 seconds, and you think, wow, this GIF means that they are going to have a conversation about their relationship. Finally, they're going to get together. And it's the 2.5 seconds at the end of the episode before one of them gets hit by a car. I don't know. Like, it's those kind of things that ends up being frustrating. And I would say that that's network problem. I would say that is when the networks use the will they, won't they for evil, when they're actually taunting fans. And that's when it gets frustrating. Clexa from The 100, will they, won't they? God, that was so frustrating for everybody. Will they, won't they? They're building it up, they're building it up, they're building it up, and then they kill her? Like, that was arguably not only one of the worst moments for fandoms in general and for the LGBTQ plus community, But that was just heartbreaking shit ass story writing that the marketing team built off of. And that was really frustrating for a lot of people. So that's when I think when the will they won't they networks create deceptive gifts, create deceptive reels, that is when you're going to get fans that no longer want to support your show for those reasons. Like, that's when it gets frustrating.
But do you think deceptive gifts are necessary? So again, I mean, this could go to a whole other thing, but yeah, because it sells it, right? So when you can even go from a journalism perspective, when you have a really good headline, right? Let's say you are trying to sell you're trying to tell a story about that. I'm looking at Lay's potato chip bag. Lay's potato chips is the greatest, potato chips ever. And you're just like, okay, how do I do a headline that you write that headline? You don't say, well, actually, they were number 3 in selling this year, and it's just like, all right, that's not as interesting. Like, you have to have like a little bit more of a heightened headline. You want a little bit of a clickbait because you want people to click because they got people gotta make money too. But what's the line? Right? Because there's the idea of like maybe something's too clickbaity. Is like, I clicked and the article has nothing to do with that. But maybe it's like, okay, no, that actually was, maybe a heightened version of what you wanted to say, but it is what the article has to say. So same thing for GIFs and GIFs and television shows. Like, all right, well, that did happen. Like, you clicked. So that's good. And maybe you lose trust when it happens too much. But if they do it once, it's like, all right, well, I wanted you to click. I wanted to sell my thing. I think there's always a line. I think it's like there's two extremes. Like, you can't not do that because you're not going to sell your show if you don't.
But then there's exciting. A difference between that potentially deceptive GIF in Netflix where the whole season is out, or a GIF like that in the middle of Law and Order SVU.
Pam says people who eat Lays tend to get laid more. See, perfect headline.
Perfect headline. Thanks. And that's that's funny. It just happens to be a whole bunch of people who had sex one year. They were like, we ate a lot of Lay's that year. And there's no correlation whatsoever. But man, you clicked that article title. I think that, gosh, now that I think about it, the most negative fan reactions you see to will they won't they's are not on Netflix series. It's not on those kind of streaming shows. It is on the shows where it's every week procedurals, and that makes sense because they are dragging it out for 22 seasons or 22 episodes.
But then streaming gets in trouble more, and obviously we talked about this too, because they cancel the shows that they did it really tightly, right? They're like, I mean, Warrior Nun, we talked about that, where it's like, I love that. That was so good. And then they just kind of end it. Or like some people get disappointed that the show ends so soon. Like, I think Atypical is a good example of that, where you kind of just get the romance for 2 seasons. And people love the romance, but it's just 2 seasons. Like, oh man, I wish I got a little more from them, So I think there's benefits and not benefits to streaming in that regard.
And I think it'll also depend on the story that you're telling at the same time. 12 Monkeys only has 4 seasons, 2 seasons the characters are together, but there's a lot of shit going on. But it ends and finishes in such a well-rounded way that you're like, that was such a complete story that I can envision their future. Fringe, I can envision their future. I can see where this is going. Like, it's very clearly written out for me. Castle, on the other hand, that was a hot mess, but there was drama there. There's so the drama.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't like each other, right?
Oh, no, they hated each other. Yeah. By the end, and this is all hearsay. I actually don't... I've heard things, but my understanding, according to the internet and Reddit, is that, like, straight up, they only filmed together when they had to. And if you actually... And I've done it. You watch the last 2 seasons, it's very clear that there's stand-ins. And that the way that they film it, like, they weren't even filming together. And yet these characters were married. And so, like, that's a married thing where the characters just, it didn't work out. I guess that brings me up to the last thing that I want to talk about. Where, like, I love the will they won't they's, but I also love Outlander, where the characters get together by episode 4 of the first season and have been together for 7 seasons. And 7
seasons that show's on for?
I think 7th season is starting right in a little bit.
That's crazy.
The final season. Now, they had enough stuff where things came up and literally, like, they got separated by time, and it was the will they, won't they get back together. I absolutely love reunion stories, like
but because of
characters who get
time, they were
separated.
separated, like
Oh yeah,
physically
so
separated.
no,
Yeah.
like she literally she goes back to the future, and
Yeah,
he's in the
that's what I
past.
figured. Because I don't think we like the ones where it's like they break up because they want to break up, and it's like, oh shit. Like,
No,
you don't watch
I
Ted Lasso, but that's kind of happening in Ted Lasso right now. The big couple is just like they just broke up because, and you're like, why? Like, just bring them
why?
together. We like them together, and it's
Yeah,
just like, why are you doing this just for the last season? But you meant like literally that they could be together, they would be together, but time travel and all that
exactly. Like I think
allowed
I
it not
like
to
that.
happen.
That if we could be together, we would be together. Can you think of any other
Mm-hmm.
shows? 12 Monkeys does that.
And there's so few is the issue. I think there's few where they're not married. You know, there's. I'm trying to think. Um, I thought, if you told me Ted Lasso last season, I'm like, yeah, like Roy Ken and Keeley, they're together and they're great and we like them. But I don't know if that show is going that direction either. I don't know. It's the will they won't they that I cannot tell you if they're gonna be together in the end of the show. I really can't because I don't know. It's interesting because the shows we talked about and there's very few shows on TV where it's just a romance show, right? Like, Ted Lasso is not a romance show. So that's why you say, like, oh, I don't know if they will be together because it really is about individual growth. And the show started with this guy who got divorced and was, has panic attacks because of things that happened. But he's still this happy go lucky guy. So that's what the show's about. But yeah, there's no true romance show. The only one I can really think of is
Except for
Jane the
Bridgerton.
Virgin. And Bridgerton.
Bridgerton
and
is
The
straight up
Bachelor.
just romance. Yeah. Yeah, Bridgerton's romance. Like there are romance shows, but usually adjacent to procedurals.
They're replaced with reality shows. So there are a lot of romance shows, and is The Bachelor, is Love Island, is Love is Blind. All those shows, the new will they won't they's.
Oh, that's an interesting idea because I think to an extent it is, but it's because it's a reality show, you actually don't know. And what's funny about that? I actually don't like those as much, I think, because of that.
That's
I think I like the comfort of knowing that at some point, Olivia and Elliot are gonna get together. I think if it takes 22 seasons, it takes 22 seasons. But I like it that I'm like, you know what? I'm pretty sure at some point they're going to get together and damn, this payoff is going to be worth it. I know that this brand new TV show that we've come up with where you have the two lawyers, they're going to get together. Like there's something comforting about that. When I open the book and I'm like, this main character, that they're going to there's something comforting about that.
But with The Bachelor, you're like
The Bachelor kind of stuff. I don't like those shows.
But they do end. So what's interesting about those shows is that they make this magical thing where in the end, technically in their narrative, they do get together, right? There's most of the time they end up getting engaged to somebody and they find the one. That's the one. But because it's reality television, you learn 2 months later they break up. But if you don't actually look at the reality of it and you only watch the presentation of the show, they're together and everyone's happily married.
But that's too many people. That's all that's the love. That's not just a love triangle. That's like a love quintet.
Oh, that's true. You would hate that even more because it's not. Yeah, that's a lot of love to go around.
I like the faded characters. I like the characters who are mates, who are meant to be together. Like I love that kind of stuff. And I wonder if it is because it's comforting, and I wonder if it is because it lends itself well to putting the characters in crummy situations, and then eventually they're going to rely on each other. But I think that the best moments of it come when they can also show character growth, when they can also use this to develop a character, or where characters develop separately, where ultimately if the characters are not with each other, they are still equally strong and ambitious and interesting characters. Interesting comment from Rachel. I feel like will they or won't they stories have a similar appeal to enemies, rivals, to lover stories? Absolutely. Rachel, I love you because I love my enemies to lover stories. I love those.
I think they are. They already. I think they're similar because they are the will they won't they. Unless it's obviously this never ended up happening, but like the Once Upon a Time situation with Emma, I think her name, the main character was, and the evil queen, where they became friends in the end, and everyone wanted them to be together because it was the rival situation. And I don't know if that's a reality where it's a will they won't they though, because again it kind of leans on the line of like, well, I guess Lena and Supergirl is a good Yeah, and Lena and Supergirl's a good example of that too. It's just like, the fans really want it and they see the chemistry. But is that a will they won't they? Because that's honestly the definition of it. Because every season you're questioning, like, will it actually happen? There is no resolution because there's really you
like
don't know.
Written will they won't they, and like a fan made will they won't they. There's definitely a difference.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain shows who build into that. The 100 was like, oh, people are really interested in these two characters. Let's
Arrow.
build a will they won't they. Yeah. And so sometimes it works and sometimes it really doesn't. So I guess the last question that I want to ask for you is, because I love the will they won't they's, I love the slow burns, the enemies to lovers, and you're on the opposite ends. What shows do it well where they are already in a relationship and you have enjoyed watching that, or are there not enough?
That do the will they won't they well?
No, that have
well.
the, like Outlander, where we have been together since episode 4 and we have been able to watch the characters grow, and it's been a really successful love story, even though they got together almost immediately.
I know Ava Lance was technically a will they won't they, but I would say Ava and Sarah, they probably did the best. That's always one I go back to. Because we just had so many more seasons of them actually together, and you got to see them as individuals. You got to see their individual struggles, but then also them together and deal with those struggles. It felt, and I always say this, it felt like a real romance in that regard. Because I feel like TV shows, once you put people together, they're just one person. It's like, that's not reality, and that's not fun. Like, they are still two different people that so happen to love each other and want to make each other better. And I like shows that do that a little bit more.
Can you think of any other ones?
Honestly, no. And also, there's so much content and so many TV shows, and also so many TV shows that are so short, and so many shows that get canceled before they end now. So it's so much harder that there's just not these long running shows anymore. So, and they don't if they do focus on the romance, it's not their primary thing. It's so much harder to pinpoint, because I don't know if these exist as much as they used to, or if romance are really the pinpoint of storytelling anymore.
Yeah. Well, let's turn it over to the fans. If anyone who's listening can think of good shows where the characters get together pretty quickly and they stay together, like Outlander or like Legends, where they're together for more than they're apart and it serves itself well to the characters, let us know. I'm curious. I mean, Chicago Fire has done it for a little bit. But the challenge with all these procedural shows is when they last 10, 11, 12, 13 seasons, the actors are ready to move on. They're ready to go try something else. And so there are points where the actors of a character relationship, they're going to leave. They're ready to go try a new adventure. And that necessitates something happening to the characters. And they either kill them or they don't.
It's interesting. You also see other shows where they're more like, this is my 9 to 5. I will do this for 20, 30 more years. Just live with this character.
Mariska Hargitay. I mean, she's Law and Order SVU. She runs the Wolf First. Like, she's game for it. She's like, this is my show. This is my lifestyle. Like, the advocacy that she does through that show is spectacular, and that's just her thing. But yeah, I would, anybody who's listening and wants to chime in, email us, thelegendaryladies@gmail.com. Tell us what you think. Cite your sources. Send us your evidence. I was thinking ultimately too, there's shows where they don't have will they won't they's at all. I guess they do. I was gonna say Star Trek: The Next Generation, which you don't get at all.
No. Well, there wasn't really.
There were two characters. You had Riker and Deanna were in a relationship before the series opened and had broken off that relationship and are still working together and still friends. And there's definitely a will they, won't they moment. And then through the movies, and then by the most recent one that came out, they are married. So like, I guess that's a will they, won't they, but during the actual series itself, that did not drive the show at all. I would say there were very few relationships that drove any Star Trek shows. The Star Trek shows drove themselves, as opposed to Castle. Well, even like it was such a team buddy show that like the relationship did not drive it because there was so much more going on.
Right. Because I mean, I think of what's the two Spock and Captain Kirk. Like I would think their relationship drove the show, right?
Yeah, but not romantically. Not a will they, won't
No,
they.
yeah, but I'm saying that's still a relationship that drove
That's
the
true.
show.
Okay, that's true. I'll give you that. But like romantically, a will they, won't they? I don't think there were any real solid will they, won't theys in a lot of Star Treks that were enough to drive a show. It was adjacent to the story. Whereas on Castle and Bones, the will they, won't they was the story. The rest of the story became adjacent. And I think for me, that's when it gets frustrating. I want the equivalent. I want it even. I don't want one to be more than the other, and that's why like for me not Outlander 12 Monkeys was really fun, why I really liked that one, why we really enjoyed Legends for the will they, won't they, because eventually it paid off to a brilliant extent. So yeah, send us your thoughts, legendary listeners. You can find us on Twitter, legends_podcast. Find us on Instagram, The Legendary Ladies. Find us on Gmail, thelegendaryladies@gmail.com. Find us at Patreon, patreon.com/The Legendary Ladies. You're seeing a theme here. Tell us what you think. Tell us your favorite slow burns. Are you on my side? Are you on Kat's side? This is like the duo debates. Maybe we'll do this on a regular basis where we put you and Morgan, and you two have to debate. And then we'll find
so much harder
Morgan
with Morgan. Morgan just so much in the middle.
Morgan's so in the middle. She'll be like, yeah, but no. So let us know what you think, and tell us if you can think of any egregious will they, won't theys. Castle was too long. Castle drove me nuts. At the time, I guess I was invested, but man, Castle drove me nuts. What's your most like egregious, Kat? What was the one that frustrated you on any show?
Frustrated me most? I'm just going Abbott right now because that's what's currently frustrating me. But I don't think I stuck around with shows that frustrate. I mean, even like you look at, I know people complain about Clark and Lana, but it didn't bother me because there's other things going on. I'm just like, all right,
there's other things going on because
so it was fine.
Matched. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's going to wrap up this episode. Let us know your thoughts. Kat, where can people find you online? And I'm sure you're doing a Kickstarter. Tell us about it.
I am. Well, at Comic Uno is where you can find me, and you could find my Kickstarter there as well. And we have a Kickstarter about romance, and we did not plan it this way, but it is a GLBL anthology of webtoons. They're all wholesome, lovey-dovey stories. So if you like that, go check it out. We're proud of it, and yeah, you don't get enough wholesome, fluffy stories, so we want to provide that to you. Stories. Yeah. No will they, won't theys. They're all just will theys.
She's like just they haves. No will they, won't theys. Just they haves.
They're just there.
You guys can find me on Instagram, Amy_hip HYP. Same on Twitter. If you're in San Diego coming up in June, you can find me playing Lady Macbeth in Macbeth with Patio Playhouse, patioplayhouse.com/Macbeth. If you are interested in getting tickets, it's going to be pretty cool. Interestingly enough, they're not a will they, won't they. They are a they have. They've been together. What's fun is we kind of got to create the story, the backstory of them. And so our Lord and Lady Macbeth have been together for many, many years. They have tried to have a family and not succeeded. And they are the kind of people that can read each other's brains just with the look that they have. They use kind of like sex and physical touch to get back to each other. But the question is, what happens when exterior forces start to mess with their relationship? What happens when witches say, thou shalt be king? And Lady Macbeth's like, sweet, I'm going to be a queen. And Lord Macbeth's like, hold on, I don't know if I want to have to kill people to be a king here. This is a little awkward. What happens when that's going on? But it's a lot of fun. So I hope you guys, if anyone's in town, comes and sees it. It'll be a lot of fun. But thank you for listening in, tuning into our episode this week. Send us your thoughts via Gmail, Twitter, or Instagram. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Stick around, subscribe, and stay legendary.